My first car when I was 17 was an Austin Healey, so I've been reading and following those things for a long time, particularly motor racing, and I concentrated on the output of the Donald Healey Motor Company, and I became aware of these special sprites probably in the late 80s, early 80s, and I started collecting photographs and articles, but there was so little known and published. I never expected to see one, and I never really expected to find out the ins and outs of them because they weren't that well covered in books, and they weren't being currently historic raced, and so therefore magazine articles were very, very lightweight and limited. I took ownership in 2000, but it was an interesting story that I went to the International Austin Healey meeting in England in '96. And while I was helping somebody put up a marquee, this car was trailered in by the then owner who'd owned it for 27, 28 years, and he'd used it in racing in the MG and Austin Healey Championships. Ian Polly was his name. So at an event like this, it was on display in the middle, but very few people took much interest because you couldn't buy a sales brochure or there wasn't much knowledge of them. It probably looked a little bit more like a homemade fiberglass special, but because I'd been following them and I thought I never expected to see one, and the idea of owning one was out of the question. So I became very good friends with Ian and his wife and two sons and said, if you ever think of selling it, let me know. Then about 3.5 years he said, are you still interested? Well, the car was first built in 1966, and primarily it was built, Donald Healey ran to promote his cars in the long distance events. So it was built as a long distance car for the 12 hours at Sebring and the 24 hours of Le Mans. So they realised that a standard Sprite was limited with its top speed and things like that, and its durability. So this particular shape, which is generally referred to as a streamliner, first one built in 1965 for Sebring, was an evolution of a number of standard-bodied Sprites which had fared in, front panels, and then they put, fastback hard tops, and then they started to make unique panels which required fabrication and modification, not just fiberglass replacements. And then I guess the next step was this shape, which was put in a wind tunnel and tested. And so what they've done, they've gone to a lot of trouble to round off the areas where you get drag to minimise maximum speed, even though it's 1293cc. And obviously they got input from quite a range of people from Formula One onwards. And as a result, these cars, even though they've got relatively mundane components, for example, the windscreen is a mini windscreen. It's just laid back at a different angle and cut in at the top so that the roof is a rounded shape and it reduces the drag. There's an under tray from the back of the floor under the seats up to the rear panel. And of course you all know that in Formula One these days they've got full under trays for streamlining. Well, this Sprite had it 1965. And then this particular model was the second series, so it was built in '66. It first ran at Sebring in March, and it was painted bright day-glow orange with a sister car, which is currently being raced and has just been sold in England. They're all known by the registration number. This is HNX 456D. The other one in '66 was HNX 455D. So that's how you tag the photographs, just through the English registration numbers. So after Sebring, those two cars were run at Le Mans 24 hours. Initially they had 4-speed gearboxes and overdrives. Then they were upgraded to 5-speed gearboxes and a single Weber. This was the only car the Donald Healey campaigned in 1967, Sebring again in March and Le Mans in June. And then the car was given a significant upgrade for 1968, and it was given a new licence number because you could only enter the same car at Le Mans 2 years in a row. So in 1968 it was easy to submit it as a new car because it had a cross-flow head, Lucas downdraft or semi-downdraft fuel injection, had a unique 5-speed gearbox, all made by BMC, all with BMC part numbers on them. It's got Formula 2 disc brakes so that it could run the 24 hours with, I think, just one precautionary brake pad change. Big fuel tank, and the aim was, I think it averaged about 99 miles per hour and its maximum speed was about 154. So all of that is pretty much in the shape because, you know, there are people currently racing Sprites who probably put out more than the claimed 150, 120 horsepower for this car. So that speed from that horsepower with proprietary parts is not a bad effort. The regulations for the Manufacturers' Championship then, I think, was standard bore plus 40. So this is 1293. But it's dry sumped, so the oil tank is in the passenger's footwell. There's an oil pump driven off the camshaft where the fuel pump normally is driven. So that extracts the oil from the sump. The sump is still a full depth and deep because I think Jeff Healey, for reliability, they always wanted to have a good, healthy supply of oil. I just think it's important that people in the Austin Healey movement see it and realise that the little group of people, Donald Healey Motor Company, put out some excellent products within the confines of their budget and their, well, it was basically a promotional tool for Austin Healey's. I always explain it, it's a bit like, you know, the Holden dealer team hanging off the side of GMH. That's what Donald Healey was to BMC.